Welcome to our side event today on reimagining development. We have some quite eminent speakers here. His Excellency Ambassador Abdullah Posi from the Permanent Representative of Tanzania. And we've got the World Council of Churches, Reverend Nicole Ashwood, and Harmeet Singh, who's General Secretary of the biggest Sikh Gurdwara, that's an institution outside India in the UK. I'm the director of Sikh Human Rights Group. Our approach to things are on pluralism, dignity, and diversity, as well as ecosystems. Now, development as a concept has been widely contested and redefined over time. For some, it represents the best strategy for poor countries to modernize. For others, it is an imperial tool of domination. Many see development as embodying their aspirations for a better life. This contestation extends across international and regional politics and practitioner perspectives, leading to multiple reconfigurations of the concept over time. Movements such as decolonisation, feminism, environmentalism have reshaped development, pushing it beyond narrow economic growth paradigms championed by the global north. This side event aims to explore alternative methods of development that integrate diverse worldviews and practices, moving beyond the limited and often exploitative paradigm. By highlighting these alternatives, we seek to foster an inclusive dialogue that respects cultural diversity and promotes sustainable, equitable development. In line with the principles of the United Nations Declaration on Right to Development, which emphasize the inalienable right to development, human-centered development, equitable distribution of benefits, self-determination, sustainable development, international cooperation, participation and contribution, and accountability and transparency, our approach seeks to reconceptualize development as a valuable aspect of human diversity. Let me introduce our first panelist, Reverend Nikki Ashwood. Reverend Ashwood is an ordained minister with the United Church in Jamaica and Cayman Islands with more than 20 years' experience in social justice. Her work as a parish minister with women, men, and children in the inner city communities in Jamaica led to supporting mission programs for economic and social upliftment and worked 8 years as education in the mission secretary at Caribbean and North American Council for Mission. In this role, she facilitated mobilization of resources and training for church and community grassroots leaders. Currently, Reverend Nikki is the program executive for the Just Community of Women and Men at the World Council of Churches, which affords opportunities to take the work with advocates and activists in legislative spaces, particularly for the UN Commission on Status of Women. This has included preparation of statements and parallel events, and also sharing leadership for annual training on women's human rights advocacy during the CEDAW session in Geneva. Reverend Ashwood has also been involved in raising awareness of practical engagement of the 12 critical areas of the Beijing Platform for Action, UN Action Coalition on Overcoming Gender-Based Violence, and supporting programs to combat inequality, food scarcity with churches and economical partners since their incumbency in 2019. Reverend Ashwood.
Thank you so much, moderator. Siblings in the struggle for justice, good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. 12 o'clock is gone. When development is defined within the understanding of comprehensive economic, social, and political processes that realize autonomy and the capacity to thrive, we must take a step back to assess what is working at the macro and the micro levels. On the whole, development is considered and determined for countries by their ability to meet the gross domestic product and the use of their natural resources for profit. But with the world imploding under inequalities triggered by the trifecta of contagion, conflict, and climate crisis, we have a responsibility to do, to think, and to be different. As people of faith, in particular in the Christian faith, we have the tendency to say we read the signs of the times so that we might reflect and respond appropriately. Let's consider 4 of these signs. Despite the major strides in development, several minority and majority world communities are grappling with the impact of suicide and mental health challenges. I am sure you all heard of the news recently where there is a challenge even here in Switzerland with assisted suicide. Natural and human-induced disasters are on the increase. Floods in arid areas, prolonged drought, desertification, volcanic eruptions, nations engulfed by rising sea levels, resulting in forced migration, conflict over turf, and ongoing trauma, with women and girls bearing the primary brunt of these issues. The rising tide of secularism manifested in insularity, although the world has become more connected than before by our global village. The I generation will more quickly record the horrors inflicted on another in some instances than be the one to offer help. Insularity is also reflected in the closing of borders, increased travel restrictions, not due, however, to contagion, but rather a desire to contain what is mine, to me, leaving the outsiders somewhere out there to fend for themselves. And of course, the pushback. But not just the pushback in terms of increasing conservatism, but the more ingenious acts of criminality, including scams and tech-facilitated gender-based violence, which impacts all humanity. Friends, siblings, we all are affected. In many Christian circles, we speak the language of metanoia, the sharp turning around, repentance even, from things that don't work for the benefit of the whole. Our response as human beings and human doings, therefore, must be counter to the understanding of development as strictly a marker of civilization and profiteering and power. We have called for a green economy, underscoring feminist approaches to development, among other stopgap measures. For the World Council of Churches, this is undergirded by the tenets of our faith that says we are all interconnected. Each of us matters because the earth is the Lord's, and we have a responsibility to be good stewards of all creation. We, therefore, must work together to transform unjust systems around us, or together we shall perish. We endorse a new international financial and economic architecture that decolonizes the process of aid and looks to reparation that invites self-determination, political and economic sovereignty for countries and people without any form of discrimination. How can people thrive and be when they know that in the face of apparent poverty, their nations owe debts charged on the account of their grand and great-grandchildren yet unborn? Debt bondage of the majority world to the minority world, which ironically owns the end product of majority world resources, earning $80 for every $1 offered in debt, servicing, or in support, must be reconstructed, must be revisited, must be revised if we truly seek to affirm the humanity and dignity of all. We call for the holding of the wealthiest 20% totally accountable for their direct and indirect role in the climate crisis. As stewards of creation, we must take a bold and decisive step. The earth is on loan to us, and we seem to have defaulted on the loan without compunction. We uphold just and sustainable consumption that is also equitable for all. Natural and renewable cannot be the expensive alternative because it triggers the perpetuation of old patterns of waste simply because natural and renewable sustainability is out of the reach of the 80%. Even as we encourage each other to buy local, we must ensure that the woman in the majority world, challenged with the feeding of her children, can live and live with dignity. That the climate refugee has a place to live. That the decision to escape the suffering faced in one country is not penalized with increased tariffs and visa penalties, but rather that we offer life-giving models that perpetuate human dignity and agency. In addition to NIFEA and the Green Village, the WCC's gender justice principles call for gender parity as the equitable granting of opportunities and authority and autonomy to women and men, while recognizing that one size does not and cannot fit all. So we respect and uphold different perspectives in various contexts, not reneging on our commitment to justice and unity. Siblings, moneyless interaction isn't only about Bitcoin and contactless payment. Rather, we may opt to revisit ways of exchanging goods and services that are not rooted in transactional sex. When we offer women, children, and men opportunities to flourish and be, we offer the world new hope. A hope that invites equality in decision-making and solution framing. A hope that shares power and stands against racism, sexism, ageism, economic inequalities, ecological degradation, and any other form of injustice. In short, and in closing, we call for an economic and sustainable model of development that encourages each of us to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. Thank you.
That was very inspiring and extends the meaning of development to be more inclusive and not just GDP centered. And I hope we, as a community of nations and NGOs, can move towards that. Our next speaker is His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Abdallah Saleh Posi, Permanent Representative of Tanzania. I'm really excited that he has been able to join us because I was born in Tanzania and most of my early life has been in Tanzania. And I feel very proud of Tanzanians, the achievements of Tanzania as a country. It's been a peaceful country with a very high literacy rate and a lot going for it. Ambassador Posi is the permanent representative to the United Nations and other international organizations. Before that, he served as Tanzanian's ambassador to Germany and was accredited to Austria, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, the Holy See, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and Switzerland. So there's a lot of experience there. Before assuming his first diplomatic obligations, Dr. Posi had served as a member of parliament and the Deputy Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office responsible for persons with disability. Previously, he worked as a lecturer at the University of Dodoma in Tanzania and practiced as an advocate of the High Court of Tanzania. He had also worked as a tutor at the Institution of Judicial Administration in Lushoto, Tanga, Tanzania. He holds LLB and LLM from the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Dr. Phil from the University of Erlangen, Nuremberg in Germany. Ambassador Posi.
Thank you very much. All protocols observed, you are all recognized. How should I start? Development is a very complex term, but even the title of this session is very complex as well, because I was just looking at inclusive models for sustainable and equitable development. So what are we looking at? Are we looking at sustainable development on one thing and equitable development as the other thing? Are we looking at sustainable and equitable development as one concept of development? And when we talk of inclusive models, are we saying that there are other models for sustainable development and equitable development which are not inclusive? Do you have equitable development which is non-inclusive, or sustainable development which is non-inclusive? Very complex. But anyway, of course, development, as it has already been said, that for a long time, it started as an economic concept by different development agencies, especially, of course, the World Bank. But of course, that reference of looking at development only at with respect to economic growth has been contested, because the quantitative approach of it was viewed as failing to look at the qualitative aspects of development. And in short, to be honest, there are many ways of looking at development. Of course, some people might look at it as structural transformation of human development, or development as democratic participation, development and environmental sustainability. And well, now we are talking about the aspect of well-being, or even, of course, when we look at it in terms of state development, state capabilities or fragilities. But to make it short, of course, for purposes of this session, is sustainable and equitable development. And just to take note that I think the concept of sustainable development is not new. It came, I think, after the publication of Brundtland Report in 1987. And the idea here was that the economic development should also take care the aspect that we should not harm development. Of course, many other qualitative aspects of development were also taken into consideration. And in that sense of looking at development in its broadest or most substantive aspect, then the question is, what is equity from a development perspective? In a very broad or short in a very short description, a person could say that equity has something to do with fairness and impartiality in some form. And of course, the mathematical aspect of it is equality. But we remain with equity as fairness. But what does this fairness mean? Without going into detail into the concepts of equity, at least it is agreed that equity should be manifested in various forms: equity of access, equity of process, and equity of outcome. Access means that if there are development initiatives, that the community should have access to it, at least through knowledge and information. And equity of the process is in the institutional process, and there comes the questions of participation. And equity of outcome is the question of enjoying the benefits, the cost of benefits. I mean, if we are talking about development should not mean that some people should continue to remain poor while others continue to flourish. Now, to be honest, when you look at those aspects of equity and sustainability, there comes the question of inclusion. And of course, inclusive development means that everybody should be included. And when we look at these concepts, equality, equity, inclusions with respect to development, it is important then to look at development as a right. Of course, we know of the UN Declaration on the Right to Development, where the human rights to development implies that all people, of course, human persons and people, are entitled to participate in, to contribute and enjoy economic, social, and cultural and political development, in which all human rights and freedoms can be fully realized. Now, the question of all people here means inclusion, of course, to participate, inclusion, and then to participate and contribute. Of course, the question of inclusion, but it's also the question of equity in access, and question of enjoyment of rights could also imply the equity of outcome. And it's important that this declaration, of course, it's not a legally binding, but it refers to the documents which contain principles which can be acceptable as the principles of customary international law. So I would argue here that, to me, sustainable development is the most substantial form of development approach, which implies inclusion and also which implies equity. And we in Tanzania, through the Article 3, sub-Article 1 of the Constitutions, we say that the state of the primary responsibility for the creation of national and international conditions favorable to the realization of the right to development. And for that matter, it can be argued that although not clearly stated, development is considered as the right. And with this, the non-discrimination provisions mean that the right to development is the right of everyone. I did not, of course, touch some other aspects stated in the definition of the right to development as seen in the UN Declaration of the Right to Development, but those have something to do with the right of self-determination and the related aspects. But what I wanted to comment here is that that also reflects Tanzania's international obligation when it comes to the right to development, because among the core principles of our foreign policy has been to work with the nations to ensure that the United Nations fulfills its objective, but also to campaign for peace and justice in the world, and that means also the right for to self-determination, and that's why Tanzania also was known for the campaign against colonialism and other forms of occupation. Now, that said, I will have to be very quickly here. I said, but by saying that our approach to development and to ensure that inclusion means that inclusion and equity had to be observed, and that is why most of the programs related to development were not just aimed at economic or mathematical economic growth, but also to ensure that people on the ground are taken on board. And that's why you have all range of projects, for example, from the big infrastructural development to other forms. For example, the TASAF project. This is more of a safety net project for those who are conversant with the social security. You know that in some other aspects, there are certain people who can or might not be able to contribute for the modern social security funds. Then the government has to, but these are the poor of the poorest, and what the government needs to do is to ensure that they do not fall below certain levels of poverty. And there comes the SafeNet program through which the government transfer funds to some community in order to enable them to make some other progress. Some further progress. And that being said, we also believe that development would only be possible if people are educated, and that's why we have free education now until the post first 7. In the past, it used to be 7 years of primary education, but now education from primary to secondary level is free. There is also more emphasis to girls and persons with disability in order to make sure that these, which are also considered as marginalized group, get equal access to education, so that to enjoy, I could say, those aspects of development, because education is key to development. Of course, we should not start matters like access to health. Of course, I've tried to summarize a lot of things. I should point out one thing, though. There are challenges when it comes to right to development, and especially, and okay, if we're talking about inclusive and equitable to development, and especially when we look at it from the international perspective, because when we talk about equitable development, then we should also think of the ways to marginalize international inequalities, yeah, and especially in matters, for example, related to trade, related to environment, and that's where we say, despite the fact that, for example, sustainable development goal approach we have made some progress, but still there are certain issues which need to be discussed. How do we work together to ensure that we change the current system to ensure that international inequalities are taken care of, and that will enable now then that to make sure that the language of development, for example, in the sustainable development goals, actually matches the language of human rights. Because if we are saying that it is important to ensure that people get access to healthcare, we reduce poverty in order to reduce maternal deaths, etc., then we cannot use the right to I mean, the economic language of growth, progressive growth, in the same way, I mean, in human rights perspective, because if we say that the right to life is fundamental, then you cannot say that let us just wait, people let's just wait that some people can continue to die as we make some progress in economy. Then at a particular point in time, things will be okay. So the fundamental aspects of human rights means that certain problems should be taken care immediately, and that should be matched with the language of sustainable development goals. And for that matter, maybe it is important to ensure that those who have capabilities do their share of the job in order to ensure that the world become a safer place and a bit more better and safer place. And I say this actually with respect to environment. Many developing countries are not polluting, and they do not have the technology which is needed to make progress compared to those who are polluting more. And you see this when it comes to energy transition, which is costly. And of course, we need energy in order to develop, but we do not have the enough capabilities. And that means that those who have polluted more needs to fulfill their international obligations in as far as the requirements of sustainable development, and also those other obligations for protection of the environment state. After saying that, I think I should Okay, I should conclude here by saying that we in Tanzania, we believe that we still have a job to do to ensure that we successfully implement the right to development, and that efforts on poverty eradications and inequality eliminations are revamped. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Posi. I remember when Tanzania became became independent, and the first president, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, he pursued a policy of raising literacy and education rather than going on industrialization that many other countries were pursuing. And I think it has had its advantages and created a lot of stability within Tanzania. And I think we can see the results today in Tanzania. So we've had speakers from a very large international institution, the World Council of Churches, bringing a transnational perspective. We've heard from a representative of state, bringing a state perspective. We now move on to a community perspective from Mr. Harmeet Singh Gill. He's the General Secretary of the largest Sikh institution of Gurdwara. We call them Gurdwaras in Southall, UK. It's the largest institution outside India, one of the most influential. Under his leadership, the Sabha has launched numerous initiatives in education, social welfare, and healthcare. Notably, it recently hosted the world's largest longitudinal health study on South Asians and was instrumental in establishing the world's first neurodiversity, Sikh neurodiversity network. A chartered accountant, Harmeet trained with the PwC and holds a degree in economics from the London School of Economics. He currently also serves as CFO of clean tech company. Harmeet Singh.
Thank you, moderator. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, and fellow speakers. It is a great pleasure to be here today and share this platform with such respected voices on a topic that is vital to our future: reimagining development in ways that are sustainable and equitable. Before I dive into the heart of my talk, I would like to introduce you to a few key aspects of the Sikh faith that will provide context for the example I bring to you today. An example of a community-based approach to development that I believe can inspire and inform broader global efforts. The right to development is generally understood through political terms, often focusing on the role of states or the rights of people to develop their own natural resources. This view is often reflected in state-oriented systems of the United Nations, where much of the dialogue revolves around political, cultural, and social rights. However, I stand here to argue that communities themselves do not sit idle, waiting for political systems to evolve. Many communities, like the Sikh community, have long established institutional frameworks that operate independently of political powers and state resources. These frameworks support and enhance key aims of development for both the individual and the community. Today, I present to you an example of how the Sikh community has adopted development approaches that transcend political structures rooted in centuries-old principles that are still relevant today. Sikhs follow a way of life or dharam called Gursikhi, which is a comprehensive system of teachings, values, and practices aimed at guiding individuals towards self-development, understanding reality, and finding fulfillment in life, family, and community. One of the core teachings of Sikhi is that there is no separation between the spiritual and the material. We are not dualists. We do not divide the afterlife from this life, nor do we divide our lives into religious and secular. Instead, we see all aspects of life as interconnected. We are guided by Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, our eternal Guru. The sacred scripture contains the teachings of our 10 human gurus, as well as those of saints and bhagats from diverse faiths and traditions. These teachings are more in concept form rather than prescriptive dogmas. These teachings offer guidance not just on personal growth, but on how to live harmoniously with others, respect the environment, and contribute to the welfare of the world. It is a holistic philosophy that emphasizes not only individual well-being, but also the well-being of society as a whole. The Gurdwara, our place of worship, is central to Sikh life. We come together as a community in the Gurdwara. The Gurdwara is where the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib Ji are read, sung and conveyed to the congregation we call the Sangat. However, it's much more than a religious space. Gurdwaras are also hubs for community service, education and welfare. In this way, Sikhs take a broad approach to development, focusing not only on spiritual upliftment, but also on education, health, social cohesion, and meeting the basic needs of all. Education has been an integral part of the Sikh tradition for over 500 years. Ever since the first Guru, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, co-educational schools have existed in Sikh communities for centuries, and education in the Sikh tradition goes beyond metaphysical discussions. It includes mathematics, sciences, ethics, music, and languages. Many Gurdwaras today run schools supported by the state. In our Gurdwara in West London, we run a state-sponsored school that essentially follows the state curriculum. In India, there are many such schools run by Sikh Gurdwaras with community funds. These schools often offer additional classes in subjects like Punjabi, the language of the Punjab region. These classes are open to everyone, regardless of religion, background, embodying the principles of inclusivity. This aligns directly with the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which promotes inclusive and equitable quality education for all. Perhaps one of the most remarkable and inspirational institutions of the Sikh faith is Langar, a free community kitchen that was formalized by our second Guru, Guru Angad Dev Ji, inspired by Guru Nanak Dev Ji. There is a well-known story about Guru Nanak Dev Ji, who once was given 20 rupees by his father to invest in a business. But instead of turning a profit, he spent the money on feeding and clothing the poor. He believed that this was a better investment and called it a true transaction. In Adam Smith's words, this was the invisible hand working. Today, Langar is served in nearly every Gurdwara worldwide. It is an open kitchen where anyone, regardless of religion, background, or social status, can eat. In the Langar hall, everyone sits together on the floor, removing any sense of hierarchy or inequality. The simplicity of the system embodies the values of inclusivity and dignity and meets several SDG goals. Zero hunger, for example. Langar feeds millions of people daily across the world, including refugees, students, and the underprivileged. For example, during the pandemic, our Gurdwara distributed thousands of food parcels every single day. SDG 5, gender equality. Volunteers from all walks of life, regardless of gender, work together to prepare and serve food, promoting inclusivity and equality. SDG 10, reduced inequalities. The practice of sitting on the floor side by side ensures that everyone is treated equally, whether rich or poor. Even kings and queens, such as the Emperor Akbar and members of the British royal family, have partaken in Langar, sitting with the common people. SDG 13, climate action. So Langar is always vegetarian, which reduces our carbon footprint, contributing to climate action. Good health and well-being. Langar has basic ingredients. Roti, known as a chapati, dal, which usually is lentils, and a vegetarian dish. This is a balanced diet with protein, starch, some fats, and has essential vitamins as well. The meals are balanced, nutritious, and meet daily dietary needs, promoting good health. So by providing free, nutritious meals, Langar addresses both SDG 1, no poverty, and SDG 2, zero hunger. In large cities like Delhi and Amritsar, non-Sikhs make up the majority of those who partake in Langar. In Amritsar, the home of Darbar Sahib, commonly known as the Golden Temple, over 100,000 meals are served every day. At our Gurdwara in West London, we serve over 5,000 a day. In India, almost everyone knows that if they feel hungry, they can go to a Sikh Gurdwara and eat without questions. All they have to do is accept the principle of equality of all humanity, sit on the floor with everyone and just enjoy the food. The atmosphere of Langar creates a community and cooperation and social networking among communities. In a way, it meets SDG 17, partnerships between communities. What Langar has done for the Sikh community is that wherever the Sikh community has gone, migrated, or is living, it can sustain itself. The institution of Langar meets the most basic need of human beings. It meets the first and most vital need to right to development, and it is neither political nor dependent on the state. What Langar does for the Sikh community is far more than just feeding the hungry. It meets the basic need of human beings, food. And it does so without the dependence on state, resources, or political systems. This fulfills the first and most crucial aspect of the right to development. At its heart, Sikhi teaches that the Creator is present in the creation. This belief encourages us all to overcome prejudices, divisions, and inequalities, and to see all of humanity as one. In this way, Langar transcends religion, ethnicity, and race. It simply meets the basic human need for food and sustenance. The Sikh approach to development aligns closely with the Declaration on the Right to Development, which states, development is a comprehensive economic, social, cultural, and political process which aims at the constant improvement of the well-being of the entire population and of all individuals on the basis of their active, free, and meaningful participation in development and in the fair distribution of benefits resulting therefrom. Article 2.1 affirms that the human person is the central subject of development and should be the active participant and beneficiary of the right to development. These principles are already being realized through community-led efforts like Langar, an inclusive model of development that is self-sustaining and fulfills multiple SDG goals without the need for state intervention. In conclusion, I stand here to argue that if we shift our focus away from state-centric models of development and give more attention to civil society, we will find that communities are already fulfilling many of the objectives set out by the right to development. Sikh institutions like the Gurdwara and Langar not only align with global development goals, but also provide a practical example of how communities can sustain themselves and promote equality, sustainability, and well-being. As we look ahead, I urge the United Nations and other global institutions to give more space to civil society in discussions about development. Communities like the Sikhs, who have long practiced inclusive and sustainable development, should be at the center of these conversations. Thank you.
Well, there we are. We've heard three very different perspectives on development. One of the aims of the Sikh Human Rights Group is that the UN is too state-centered. A lot of work, especially the sustainable development goals, are being met by communities and civil society, but there isn't really the space of hearing them out and bringing them on board so they can act as good examples to each other. So I'll open the floor to any questions, any issues. Yep.
I'm Alev Mine of the One Goal Initiative for Governance. So I hear a lot of things that really are quite relevant, I must say. About Reverend Ashwood, I think that people shut others out in the belief that there is no recursion of risk, but there is recursion of risk. And when the risk is realized for oneself, one does not necessarily have the time to even realize that it happened before one is muted or one dies, you know. So it is quite tragic if people don't see what they're doing to themselves. About the to the Ambassador Posse, the world we're moving toward is one where the right to life will depend on the sufficiency of one's own productivity, by whichever measure will be in the air at any point in time. And this happens in conjunction with governments being hollowed by the private sector, by investors and people who can make great decisions on their own. And the whole world is kind of becoming like a huge factory.
So can I ask you to please pose a question to the, because, yeah.
He also mentioned that if people keep dying, people think that at some point there will be a situation that will be acceptable. And the measurement of well-being in that sense is not relevant because it does not measure the well-being of those who died in that process. So what I propose in the One Goal Initiative for Governance is to keep an accounting of the deceased and the muted. This was not a question, obviously, but it's just, you know, something in your direction. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
I would like to ask what strategies can be implemented to ensure that marginalized voices are included in the development dialogue, and how can we facilitate their participation in decision-making processes that affect their lives and communities? Thank you.
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, this event itself, we are, you know, a marginalized community, is a very small one, but we've been given this platform to express these ideas and thoughts. So this is a prime example of how we can get involved more. Obviously, supranational bodies like the UN are always going to have more weighted towards nation states, the more powerful voices, but just being able to have a voice is a start. Being able to share the ideas, the experiences that we've been working on for the last 500 years, they work. We need to see more of these.
Thank you, I think. Are you hearing me? Yes. So two of the core arguments of the feminist agenda is A, walking with humility, which means that we do not speak for the marginalized community. And then there is the call for us to recognize that we operate in a multi rather than universe. The joy is that even as we say that we cannot use the tools of the first world, minority world to counteract the broken systems, there is a sense in which if we do not speak with and to those who are holding the current spaces of power, then the transformation is unlikely to occur. So what does that mean for inclusion? It does mean that, as my brother has said, Sikh, that we need to consider ensuring spaces are made at the table for those who would not normally have been included. I don't believe in voiceless people. I believe that we mute people or we conveniently choose not to hear, which I guess forms muting them in another sense. Within the World Council of Churches, we try to ensure that not only do we meet with our major stakeholders, which would be the heads of churches and ecumenical bodies, but we often seek to meet people where they are, and that's through the grassroots organizations, by providing training and space for voice and representation, sometimes vote, in spaces of power. So in 2 weeks, for example, we will be holding the Women's Human Rights Advocacy Training here in Geneva, where people from all over the world will have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about how the UN spaces operate, and more critically, how to engage with the mechanisms that seek to respond to some of the other pieces of the mechanisms that the UN uses, for example, CEDAW. The challenge, however, with ensuring that the minority or majority world, as I prefer to think of it, voices are included, is that little bit of detail called insularity. Visas become a key issue. And in almost every country where there is a UN public base, we find that ability to migrate or move in those spaces becomes highly restricted. And the more minoritized you are, or racialized or diminutized you are, the less likely it is that you have a chance to sit on the floor around that general feast that is offered for all. So we also insist that we need to hold our public figures accountable. Not just the government of Tanzania, no shade, but to hold our governments in our countries accountable by providing the resources to make our people speak and speak with some degree of understanding. That's just one of the examples. We're also involved in the new economic, international, financial architecture, tax, among others. But yes, we definitely need to be more inclusive. And some of that also means ensuring that the minority nations make room and provision for the majority nations. Thank you. Very good question.
Thank you, Ambassador. Okay.
Just to respond to the question, if I understood it correctly, of course, yes, there is that risk of the growing influence of the big corporations to the affairs of certain states. But what I want to say here is that this is the very reason why even the concept of growth in looking at development has been challenged. And yes, now that we have the concept of sustainable development, our job is to make sure that we try to perfect it. And for that matter, some scholars, some researchers are arguing that it's not just enough to identify target. It's very important to come up with the clear division of labor as to who does what, so that we do away from the blame shifting. And that's why others are saying that we should not just look at the historical comparisons. It's not just enough to say that, you see, today lesser people are dying in certain countries from malnutrition than it was before. That's what I meant, that the language of growth does not match with the language of human rights. Human rights, especially things like rights to dignity, rights to life, means that certain things should be addressed now, while the language of growth means that, okay, certain things should be realized progressively. Of course, even in some human rights treaties, there is that language of progressive realization, although there, of course, the international jurisprudence is that does not mean that the governments or states or international institutions have the options not to take any measures. So I think that's, I wanted to clarify that one. And with respect to the structures, of course, now people are talking, of course, we believe in the language of reforms in different institutions in whatever way. But the important thing is that the people who had lesser voice in the past or now should have equal voice in the future. And that's why people are talking about the reforms in the United Nations, the reforms in the WTO, etc., etc. But as a country, for example, we played a big role for the establishment of UNCTAD, for the establishment of South-South cooperation, because we believe it is very important for countries in the South, of course, in the development perspective, to stand united. That is the best way of making our voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes if anybody else, Simran. Could you repeat the question?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what urgent actions can the global community take to promote a more holistic approach to development? I'm just keen to see if there's some success stories from Tanzania.
Wow. It's a very broad question. What urgent actions needed to change? Of course, the usual language, we need to learn from the experiences of those countries which have done better, but that one is not enough. As I've said, at the end of the day, you do not have a copycat solution in every state. That is not that whatever is taken in Tanzania may be applicable maybe in India or in Senegal, in Uruguay or Indonesia or anywhere. But the most important, and especially from the international perspective, is to really move away from the status quo. So it is very important to listen to what the researchers are telling us, and to look at the real problems which requires real solution. I'll give you an example of well, 2020, 21, those were the COVID years. The challenges of developing countries when it comes to the access, let's say, to things like vaccines, were caused by the existing structures related to research, development, and supply chains of the pharmaceuticals. And then the question is, how do we move to address those? So it is in that aspect that I argue that it is important to look at the current structural issues which have caused inequalities, and to address those. Now, it is difficult to mention one action, one after the other, but at least we should tackle the structural barriers which have caused international inequalities.
Well, unless there's another burning question, go on. I think we are going to please the administrators by finishing before time, because they're normally otherwise herding people out. Thank you very much, Ambassador Posey. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think it's been quite an interesting panel. Yeah.